Hi, my name's Ben, I'm the production manager of Syvecs, and today we're going to talk about grounding. We generally ask the question, how many grounding points do I need? Where do they need to be? To be honest with you, there's no real short answer. It depends on how the car's built. Is it a fiberglass body? Is it a tubular chassis? Is it a standard OEM chassis? And, is it a standard engine, etc., etc.? Like, there's multiple places to ground a car. I mean, most of it needs to be grounded, which is very important. Why would we be grounding an engine? So when you have an ignition event or your spark goes off in your spark plug, you may recall that in most occasions there is one wire, and if you're looking at a HT lead or early ignition system on a cars from like the 80s, 90s, I mean still get them in the 2000s, where HT leads have one wire. So that's the live wire. So it needs to earth somewhere. It can't just spark for no reason. I mean, you can hold it and don't hold it. I don't recommend that. But you can see a spark happening on the end of a spark plug if the voltage and current is high enough. But for it to be effective, the spark plug itself is actually grounding through the block of the engine. There needs to be a solid ground, or an earth strap, as it's known, going from the block somewhere that is very localized. I mean, don't do it off of something like your throttle body. I mean, you can run them off your plenum, you can run them off of most people will run them off of the head, one of the bolts on the head, which is closest to the ignition event, and I personally would run it from the head as well, straight to the chassis. I mean, you don't really need to run it all the way down to the battery itself. The chassis itself is, the continuity on the chassis is more than capable of handling that sort of current. I would avoid grounding your ECU directly to the chassis. Batteries, believe it or not, can work in some form as a form of a buffer for magnetic noise, as we went over in a previous video. The battery itself will absorb a lot of noise and will deliver much cleaner energy to the ECU if it's wired directly. And I mean directly, you need to be fusing it and switching it, giving it plenty of gauge of wire if it's required. Most of our ECUs will run off of one 12 volt or two. I prefer two. I would be running 2 to 3 solid grounds to the battery. If not, I mean, worst case scenario, you run it to the chassis, but I don't advise it. Again, sensors, you shouldn't really be grounding to chassis for obvious reasons I've just gone over. If it's measuring something like ambient air temperature in the engine bay, I mean, I know people doing that. Yeah, I mean, you get away with it, but you are heightening a risk of getting electro feedback, so some form of magnetic feedback through the chassis to the rest of the car, and we don't want that. So I would stick with using analog grounds, AN grounds, and logic grounds, and make sure those two are definitely separated, because one is noisier than the other, as I found out on my own car. And if you mix them together on 2 individual AN grounds, you will get some horrible noise bleeding across, and your water temperature goes up with your RPM. One ground strap for a body harness, for example, can cause you no measure of problems. A friend of mine years ago had his engine changed. He pulled up to my house, the car was just about running, and he said, "Ben, whenever I put my indicators on, my interior light flashes," and everything else was doing the opposite to what he wanted it to do. It turned out it was a bolt that wasn't done up properly for the earth strap. So once we tightened that up, it fixed everything. It's simple. It may come across as, a bit dumb, but grounding is, in my opinion, one of the biggest bugbears for cars. And if you can't find it for whatever reason, it's, you can end up spending days on a car trying to find out why it's not right. Tip number 1 from me is, if you have a problem and it's not, it's widespread, like there's problems everywhere, go straight to your grounds. That's normally the first thing that is the issue. As I say, it can be a wide subject but simple, and it's just a case of following your steps. But if there's any questions that you'd like to know on this subject, please leave us a comment, consider subscribing, hit the bell icon, and we'll look forward to you on the next one.